Canada is now consistently reporting more than 1,000 new cases a day. Most of today's new ones are in Ontario and Quebec, Quebec accounting for 838 new cases. Manitoba has 40. Further west, Alberta has 153 new cases, and BC, 125. Small business owners in Canada have their own projection for the coming months, and it looks dire. Not just is revenue down for many businesses, the federal commercial rent assistance program expires today. It was a flawed program, but at least it was something. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says 31% of its members didn't qualify for the rent assistance program. Either their landlord didn't apply for it or they didn't meet the criteria of a 70% reduction in revenue. The government has promised to improve and replace the program, but that hasn't happened yet, and rent is due tomorrow. Mike Drolet explains the anxiety that is causing.
A chill has set in on the service industry, and it's not just from the fall weather. Restaurant owners had been banking on a return to normalcy.
If we're not operating at 100%, we can't make money.
But with COVID-19 numbers on the rise, that's looking unlikely. The 23 Firkin pubs in Ontario have survived, but only barely. Rent relief had been their lifeline, but the government program called CECRA has come to an end, leaving tenants on the hook for 100% of their rent.
We have to have programs in place to carry us all the way through to the summer of next year. Without that, the industry is going to collapse, not just Firkin.
If the government is working on a replacement program, it's not saying, at least not with any specifics.
We're aware of that, and I can tell you that we're not going to let them down.
A vague promise, which isn't good enough for an industry that's working with very real numbers.
The reality is that the math just stops working for restaurants. No matter how hard you work, no matter how innovative you are, if you're a business that operates on 5% margins, but 50% of your business is gone, there's just no way to make that math work.
CECRA, for all it did, was deeply flawed. It had a budget of $3 billion, yet just over half was dispersed. Business experts say the criteria to qualify were far too narrow.
So obviously, I think they need to either change the focus of the future program and make it much more easier and simpler for the end user to use it.
And the government better announce something soon, because rent is due, and businesses on the brink have some big decisions to make.
Anxiety is putting it mildly, I think, for a lot of business owners. Rent is just a huge expense.
Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Only about 3 million Canadians have downloaded the federal COVID Alert app, in part because the technology is not available to everyone. The federal government developed the app, but it's up to the provinces to adopt it. And as head of Yourex-West explains, Western provinces are still waiting for changes to be made.
Early in the pandemic, Alberta was first out of the gate, launching an app that could help with COVID-19 contact tracing. But there were big problems with Alberta's Trace Together. Problems now solved in another app developed by the federal government.
What I would stress is that this is a very different app, and it's one that has wide backing, and it's one that's been lauded not just in Canada but internationally as being a really right-headed way of approaching this problem.
Problem is the federal COVID Alert app is still not available in Alberta. In fact, so far it's only been adopted in Ontario, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. A senior source with the federal government says the delays boil down to jurisdiction. Ottawa can't impose the app on provincial governments, and some provinces don't yet feel the app fully meets their needs.
I spoke to Minister Haidu, I think it was last week. I think there were still a couple of issues, still a couple of questions that were remaining to be answered.
It is an ongoing discussion. The team with the federal government is working with individual provinces at the same sequentially, so we are on that list. But we are also working with them to make some adjustments that will meet our needs.
But other holdouts are now coming around.
Some provinces who weren't really interested in it before, like Quebec, for example, have very recently said, okay, we're in the middle of the second wave, and suddenly, just in the last few days, something that they were resistant, they've suddenly agreed to start rolling out the app.
And Manitoba says it could adopt the app as early as next week. Still, territorial governments say the app wouldn't be well suited for its citizens. Wi-Fi access up north is not widespread. But for the rest of the country, Health Canada says it's hopeful the app will become a widely used weapon in the fight against COVID-19's second wave. Heather, Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.